Hey everyone, Keto Comic here. Welcome to White Collar Crime Wednesday. Today we have Bernie Madoff Part 1. Yes, I'm going to answer the first question. Couldn't you put all of this in one episode? Absolutely, I could. But this was what most people consider the scam of the century. There's a lot of background to it, so I'd rather put it into two more digestible parts than just cram it all into one 45-minute video. So I may do two 25-minute videos because I want to cover a lot of the background on this because the scam itself was pretty simple in it's a pretty simplistic Ponzi scheme. It's just what's amazing is how he was able to get away with it and keep it going for so long. So we're going to cover this in two parts, and let's get started on part one, shall we? Also, I have a sinus thing going on, so I know I sound like a bullfrog, so I apologize. You may also hear me wheezing because it's got my asthma kicked up. I'm fine. I got my nebulizer sucking on that. Should be fine. But anyway, let's get into it, shall we? Below, you will see young Bernie Madoff before he became a scoundrel. He was born Bernard Lawrence Madoff, April 29th, 1938, Queens, New York, which is one of the five boroughs of New York City. He was born to Ralph and Sylvia Madoff. Ralph was initially a plumber and then eventually got his certifications to become a stockbroker. And when they were a plumber, they lived a pretty blue collar lifestyle in Queens. Bernie was one of three children. He had two siblings, Sandra Weiner and Peter Madoff. Peter will play an integral part in this saga, as will his daughter. But they lived a pretty working class lifestyle during the plumbing days, and then he went and took his Series 7 and Series 6, which are the stockbroker's exam, which I actually passed once upon a time when I used to sell insurance in college. I sold insurance that was kind of a variable, that had variable investments in it, universal life, universal variable life, that kind of thing. So I had to essentially become a stockbroker to do that. So I did take the Series 7, which is the stockbroker's exam, and I also took the Series 6, which is the ethics exam. And his father studied and took those. Once upon a time, you did not have to have a finance degree to do that. You could just sit for the exams. So that's how his father, Ralph, became a stockbroker. And of course, this was he was born in the height Bernie was born in the height of the Great Depression. Ralph was a plumber throughout the Depression because, as we know, things like plumbers, electricians, carpenters, mechanics, those things are kind of depression and recession proof. So he was lucky enough to be in a trade that allowed them to maintain a normal blue collar way of living in Queens during the Depression. And then after the Depression, when people were investing again, the Depression officially ended in 1942 with World War II stimulating the economy. It basically, people began to invest again. So he then sat for the broker's exam, and of course, it being that people were just now realizing they could again make money in the stock market, Ralph Madoff made a very comfortable living, and they were able to move from Queens to the more upscale area of Brooklyn, where they per- purchased, excuse me, can't talk today, purchased a very modest brownstone, redstone in Brooklyn, and that's essentially Bernie was already pretty well high up in high school when this occurred, but that's where he got the taste for being a stockbroker. Uh, Sandra was a, excuse me, Sandra, what, Sylvia, I'll get it out here in a minute. I apologize, guys. Sylvia, that's the effects of Benadryl. Sylvia was a homemaker. They were the children of Polish immigrants that had come to this country to escape all the anti-Semitism that predated World War II. So definitely a traditional New York Jewish family. Young Bernie did okay in elementary school. He did attend Far Rockaway High School in Queens, graduating in 1956. It was there at Far Rockaway he met the woman that would become his wife, Ruth, which we will talk about. And Upon his graduation, or very near his graduation, the family, as I said, did, because of the added income that being a stockbroker added, were able to go from Queens, which is still pretty working class, to Brooklyn, which is a little more hipster and upper middle class. One thing that his father instilled in him was a strong work ethic, and a love of money. Um, so Bernie ended up working. He excelled as a swimmer for Far Rockaway High School, and he had a love of the water. So he worked two jobs that were water related: a lifeguard during the summer at the pier, and at the local country club pool. Also, he got on with a sprinkler company to install sprinkler systems, and he saved all of his money from those jobs. So he believed that money should be something that is saved and allowed to grow from an early age. One thing that people will say about Bernie is that he was always kind of a con man. Uh, he had one of those personalities that you just were naturally attracted to, very charismatic, very talkative, very funny, a very attractive young man. And so there were stories of how he would kind of con his way through high school. He wasn't the most academically prowess. He did okay, but there was a rumor that he actually faked an entire book report, never read the book, but faked his way through it, and the teacher gave him an A. So he was always had the ability to spin a tale, if that makes sense. So unfortunately, that would be to the detriment of many of his clients and to his advantage later on in his life. Bernie, after graduation from Far Rockaway, he did attend 1 year at the University of Alabama, which is kind of odd for a New York Jewish boy to go all the way to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where he spent 1 year, 1956 to 1957. He was a fraternity man, I believe, in the Tau Su Epsilon fraternity. But that wasn't for him. He wanted to go back to be close to his friends and family in New York, as well as his high school sweetheart, Ruth Alpern, who was attending Queens College at the time. So he relocated back to Queens and went to Hofstra University, majoring in political science, where he graduated in 1960. Now, Ruth Alpern, born May 18th, 1941, she is age 78 in Queens. Her parents were accountant Saul and homemaker Sarah Alpern. She was a graduate of Far Rockaway High School, where she met Bernie, and they were instantly attracted to each other. They both been said that it was love at first sight. And she later attended Queens College, where she graduated with a degree in psychology. I have a degree in psychology, and let me tell you, you can do absolutely nothing with it at the bachelor's level. And as I did, went into several other different careers, she did. She began working as a bookkeeper in local businesses upon graduation. Her and Bernie married in 1959, and eventually she would become the bookkeeper and staff accountant at their company, which was the kind of the center of all this. But she would also become kind of a homemaker as well, because once their sons were born, she kind of stepped away from the business just a little bit, although she always had kind of a hand in the bookkeeping. Later on, I guess just is something she had always wanted, she did go back to NYU in 1992, graduating with a master's in nutrition, which seems kind of an odd thing. So upon his graduation from Hofstra, Bernie had intended to go to law school and become an attorney. He enrolled at the Brooklyn Academy of Law, and but found out very quickly that that was not for him. So again, my apologies for the crap. So he took the $5,000 that he still had saved from his lifeguarding job. His parents paid for his college. And he borrowed another $50,000 from Ruth's father, Saul Alpern. And with that $55,000, he started Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities in 1960. And when he dropped out of law school, he did just like his father and went immediately and sat for the Series 7 and Series 6, which allowed him to trade on the stock exchange. So Madoff Investment Securities LLC was born in 1960 with Bernie Madoff as the sole and Ruth Madoff as the sole board members. They started out trading penny stocks. Now, if you don't know what that is, think of the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, where Jordan Belfleur is working at that tiny little brokerage in Long Island, trading off what they call the pink sheets. Well, penny stocks are stocks that don't actually get listed on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange because they are worth so little. You can get into just a few dollars, a couple of dollars a share, all the way down to 10 cents a share for some of these are companies that some people believe will have a bright future, but for the most analysts kind of poo-poo them, so they end up trading on what they call the pink sheets, listed on their own exchange, and he started out trading those. And like Jordan Belfleur in the Wolf of Wall Street, he started working exclusively with more blue collar people because those are really the only people that can afford, not afford, but they're the only people that could be bamboozled into investing in penny stocks. You have to be very careful. It takes a very sophisticated investor. So you either have ultra rich people or people that have a huge background in trading that will risk and understand penny stocks, or you have working class schmoes like you and me that might can be talked into investing in penny stocks against their best interest. So that's what he did. It was kind of questionable from the beginning, though he was absolutely not doing anything illegal. It's absolutely legal to trade penny stocks, but that's what he started out doing. During the this time, the early years of his company, his two sons, Mark and Andrew Madoff, were born and would end up playing an integral part of in the business and the scam. And as you can see from their dates here, they have both already passed away, and that's a story I will cover in part 2. But let's get further into Madoff Investments LLC, shall we? In the early days of his company, Bernie relied on just the basics of technology: typewriters, word processors, printers. Even into the 1980s, he was still relying on kind of archaic types of office equipment. I mean, people went in there and, still using dot matrix printers, when there were already laserjet printers out. And he had a friend, in fact, his brother, Peter Madoff, who was technically the office manager and office administrator, said, "Hey, Bernie, we got to update." So Bernie went twofold. He started investing a lot of money into the infrastructure of his business and started getting the most sophisticated. Like he went from absolutely archaic to absolutely cutting edge technology and was the first one to do some online trading, even though it was kind of closed networks at the time because the internet wasn't really, it was a thing because Al Gore invented it. But it wasn't like a widespread thing that everybody has that we have now. Only businesses utilized it. So it was like a business and government to government type of business to business, government to government type of thing. So he did use some closed network trading. And because of that, he was tapped to help with the National Association of Securities Dealer Automated Quotations, and that's a mouthful that simply translates into the NASDAQ. He was tapped to kind of help put that together. And because of his involvement in it, he did serve as chairman of the NASDAQ for 3 one-year terms in the 1990s, the latest being 1996. So this guy went from a virtual novice trader trading penny stocks to now trading highly technical, because think about it, penny stocks didn't really take a whole lot to trade. You could do it on pen and paper making a phone call, and that's how he started and that's how he operated his business. But then when he made the transition into blue stocks or more blue chip or more traditional stocks, you had to go more automated, and he was slow to catch on. But once he did, it skyrocketed, and he eventually became a behemoth in the NASDAQ, which is why he was so well respected. He also brought all of his family on. Not only was Ruth still the part-time bookkeeper, but his brother, Peter, ran the office daily. He was kind of the go-to person. Bernie was very rarely in the office. That was a lot of things that former clients I've listened to interviews said, that Bernie was very rarely in the office, especially after the business was more established. It was Peter who ran it. His niece Shauna, who's Peter's daughter, did their PR and was also the compliance. She worked a lot with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. She worked with PACs on Capitol Hill. Bernie was very well politically connected. He and Ruth donated millions of dollars to political campaigns of both the Republican and the Democratic Party. So everybody's dirty little hands were in this. That's how I think they kept the heat off themselves for so long. And she worked a lot with that aspect of the business. And then you had Andrew and Mark, who were the de facto heads of trading. He relocated his business from Queens and Long Island to the Lipstick Building on Wall Street. If you've seen pictures of the Wall Street skyline, you see the building that's round with all the ridges in it. He was in that building. It was a very prestigious building. His business was were on two floors, the 17th and the 19th floor. The head office was on the 19th. The actual trading floor was on the 17th. And Bernie relied on separation of church and state, or the left hand not knowing what the right hand doeth, to keep his scam afloat, because Andrew and Mark claimed they didn't know that the scam was occurring. But they were heads of trading, so they kind of had to know. I don't want to get too much into what the scam actually was until part two, but that's the reason they were indicted, because based on their positions, there was absolutely no way they couldn't have known something fishy was going on. So he kept his administrative offices and the decision makers on the 19th floor. The rest of the actual trading on the 17th floor. So by and large, Bernie built his reputation on being a good old Jewish American family business. Because of his father-in-law Saul's connections, he was able to, as a nationally known, very respected accountant, he was absolutely able to sign some very high-profile clients. We're talking like Steven Spielberg, Kevin Bacon on the West Coast, because Bernie kind of expanded the business from the East Coast to the West Coast in the 90s. So he was able to sign some pretty high-profile clients, and because of that, it was an honor to work with Bernie Madoff. You couldn't just call Bernie Madoff and open up an account. You had to basically be invited or referred. He had built kind of a network of referrals by schmoozing the country club set in LA, in New York, and then later on in Palm Beach, Florida, which has the highest per capita of millionaires, and mostly Jewish millionaires in the country. So he worked his network, that's why networking is so important, and was able to build a system of referrals. So if Joe Bob, who's already working with Bernie, refers Jim Bob, and Jim Bob will meet with Bernie, and Bernie will be the consummate professional. He will wine and dine, and he will say something like, I don't want to take all your money. Let's just date. Give me a little bit of your money, see how I do, and then we'll get married later on. You give me all your money. So he knew the right things to say, the right buttons to push. Bernie developed a reputation for a guarantee of 10% returns yearly. So that's about just under 1% a month growth on money over a year's time. Now remember what I said, that there's been very few people in the history of the stock market that can do that legitimately. Usually if you have guaranteed returns of over 5%, there's something fishy going on, and that's exactly what was going on with Bernie. Bernie, from the time the business was founded in 1960 to about 1991, he was doing legitimate trading and was making above average returns, I'd say somewhere 5 to 7%. But then in 1991, which was the pivotal year, he started guaranteeing 10% returns, or around 10% returns on investments. And a lot of people think that 1991 is when it went from a legitimate brokerage house, even though he was making millions of dollars doing it. It had a very comfortable lifestyle. He's been quoted as saying, I made enough legitimate money to keep myself and my family in the lifestyle that I wanted. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the thrill of being known as Wall Street Titan. Who knows? And the fact he was well connected with the NASDAQ, well connected with the Jewish community and the Wall Street community, he was able to do that. So 1981, he started guaranteeing these returns, and that's where the problems began. Though many people think that he was always kind of a shyster, that it was never really 100% above board, just that 1991 is the traceable scam as we know it. But in part two, we're going to get into what the scam actually was and the outcome of that scam. But just think 1991 is when it went from legitimate, as far as we know, to illegitimate. I'm not getting into Bernie's Ponzi scheme, but I want to give you an overview of what a Ponzi scheme is because that's essentially what 1991 and thereafter was. A Ponzi scheme is credited back to Carlo Charles Ponzi in the 1920s, who was an Italian immigrant, very charismatic, he was the type of person you would follow. I mean, he was just that kind of person. He started guaranteeing people 10% returns in 90 days trading international postage stamps. Yeah, if you just sat down and thought about that, you would realize there's probably not enough value in international postage stamps, different trading postage stamps, different countries, to generate any kind of return. But people believed him, and that's what he did. Postage coupons are postage stamps. But what he was doing and why the Ponzi scheme is named after him, because he had the biggest at the time, is that you guarantee people great returns. You take in all this money and you pay your early investors with the new money you're taking in. So if I invest $100 and I expect 10% return, I'm going to expect $110 back in 90 days. So in 90 days, he will give me my $110 back, or he will give me my $10 and roll it back and ask me if I want to roll it back over. But you get my picture. I have $110 at my disposal in 90 days based on his promises. But instead of it actually coming from legitimate investment, he's simply taking Sally's $110 that she just invested and paying me. So as you can see, as long as there's more money coming in than is going out, a Ponzi scheme can last infinitely. But it's when the money dries up that you start having problems. So that's essentially what Bernie Madoff was doing. And in part two, I will get into that and the outcome. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, y'all, like, comment, share, subscribe. And I'm sorry for the scratchy throat. Hopefully next week I'll be over it. But ketosis, y'all. Keto comic. Out.